simple thing is if we live in Malaysia and we have a house in Malaysia and we have a house in the United Kingdom, we actually need to have a will in both countries. The United Kingdom will not necessarily look at a Malaysian will, and Malaysia will not necessarily look at a British will. So multi-family office approach is much more about looking at those deeper implications. What are the assets that someone might hold? What are the implications? What are the steps that need to be put in place? The steps which need to be taken, to ensure there's a smooth transition, as opposed to just, what stocks do I buy? How do I allocate?
3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode on the Long with FVR. Today we have
Reuben
and
Tom.
Nice to meet all of you, because this is a special edition. Now we have more than one guest, and we have a particular view, because it has like one of those buildings with an helipad, but people are asking, wait a second, this is a nice view, these are nice gentlemen. Can you tell us a little more about yourself?
Sure, so what would you like to know?
Well, we can start from the beginning, because Reuben, I believe that you come from a land a little far away from here.
Sure.
So does you. So
right.
we can start by senior.
Sure.
Tell us how everything started.
So I grew up in Australia, originally in Tasmania, which was a wonderful place to grow up. It's fantastic panoramic nature, very nice lifestyle, I think. In any rural place, it's very nice, it's very relaxed, it's very close-knit community. But at some point, when I got a bit older, there was perhaps limited opportunity. So I moved to Sydney for several years, and then I finally made the move out to Malaysia about 6 years ago.
That's
so this year.
Very, very surprising to learn about this journey that you took. What about you?
So I was the other side of the world in England, and I grew up there until I was about 18, and then was travelling until I found my way here, and now I'm settled in Kuala Lumpur as well. I'll be living here for the foreseeable.
That's an amazing point of view, that from different parts of the world converging into the APAC region. Question for both of you. Across your journey, why APAC?
For me, I think I originally came out here, I was working a lot in the region, and shortly before the COVID-19, I made a decision to be based in the APAC region. A lot of the companies I was working with were in Thailand, Vietnam, China, and when we looked across the region, where is a natural place to live, I think Malaysia was really the best place, the best choice for me. We have the central time zone. Perhaps 50% of the world's population lives within a 7-hour flight of the city, definitely. We take phone calls from the United States in the morning, from Europe, the UK, quite comfortably in the evening. It's just, in many ways, it's the perfect environment for your career, for business, but at the same time, it gives you the access to really wonderful places to travel, the Himalayas, Japan, Bali, and so on. So you have everything here, really.
Nice. For me, I've been travelling for quite a while around different parts of the world, doing the backpacking thing, and so I'd lived in Japan for a few months, I'd lived in Thailand for a few months, so I knew I wanted to come back out here. Now, in a professional sense, it's a good part of the world to live in, as Reuben said, for business connections and so on, and you get, I'd say it's a nice cross between the rural Asian style of life, and it's also quite westernised as well, so you don't lose a lot of your creature comforts. And yeah, it just meant I can continue my work in a place in the world that I really like.
It's true. The professional setting is something that Malaysia, the Singapore corridor, and also Indonesia, the region itself has something totally singular to other places. Among industries, people always want to learn more about the worldwide of finance, but within those there is private wealth, the industry that Melbourne Capital Group is into. Can you explain a little more about what is that and how the common people can understand this more?
Sure. So I think private wealth is something which everyone has, and perhaps when wealth comes with scale, the solutions required to manage it and the practical problems which emerge become much bigger and much more complex, and more help is required. But actually, even for relatively small amounts of wealth, the questions are always the same. How should I structure things? How should I set up my structure? How should I allocate my money? Should I keep it in cash, perhaps invest it? Most people want to buy a house at one stage in their life. And then finally, how do I pass this on to the next generation or donate it to charity and so on. So that's really what private wealth management is all about. It's those three pillars. And I suppose where the conversation becomes really focused in this region is there is a lot of new wealth, there's a lot of new money, and these conversations are just beginning about how to create really long-term planning solutions, I guess, whereas maybe it's a bit more of a mature industry in other areas of the world.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And what about you? Where do you got the attention to say we can go from here?
Yeah, I think Reuben covered it on a good holistic level, and especially out in this part of the world. If you're living in Malaysia, you often don't have income tax on your foreign sourced income. Other parts of Asia, it's like that as well. There's a lot that you can do here in terms of structuring your wealth to minimise the tax that you pay, and also to maximise your savings for certain life goals, retirement, funding kids' education, things like that.
Allow me to introduce this Chinese proverb that has been hitting across the region, that generational wealth or the wealth of a family doesn't last 3 generations. And there is something that in Asia a lot of people have been trying to get more and more mainstream, which is the family offices, the single family offices and the multi-family offices. How is this into the private wealth industry?
Oh, it's an interesting point. So the wealth industry in this part of the world has traditionally been focused on asset management, which is how do I make investments. And when you look at the investment sort of landscape, the financial services landscape here, it's really focused on investment options. Different mutual funds, different unit trusts, different investment propositions. The multifamily office is where people start to talk about, actually I need to go a little bit deeper than just how do I allocate my money. How do I set up a family office investment vehicle? How do I invest this money for multiple generations? And that's where the tax planning comes in. That's where the legacy planning comes in, the will writing. I mean, two of the most common things. The first one is, not many people realize we actually need to have a will in every country where we own assets. So a simple thing is if we live in Malaysia and we have a house in Malaysia and we have a house in the United Kingdom, we actually need to have a will in both countries. The United Kingdom will not necessarily look at a Malaysian will, and Malaysia will not necessarily look at a British will. So multi-family office approach is much more about looking at those deeper implications. What are the assets that someone might hold? What are the implications? What are the steps that need to be put in place? The steps which need to be taken, to ensure there's a smooth transition, as opposed to just, what stocks do I buy? How do I allocate? An interesting point about that conversation as well is they're just starting to introduce capital gains tax in Malaysia and a few other countries. They're removing foreign income tax exemption in Thailand, and so suddenly people are needing to have a new conversation about their assets. As Thomas mentioned before, there's very light taxation before, so you didn't really have to consider these tax planning scenarios. You just buy assets, buy mutual funds, you receive some profits, take the profits, but now you need to go a lot deeper.
Yeah, it's something that people is realizing more and more, especially right now across the young people that are realizing that working hard is one thing, but to preserve their capital is even harder. What have you seen on your front?
Yeah, it's definitely the case, especially with inflation being through the roof as well. The conventional methods of leaving money in a bank account with just accruing interest are now obsolete, and you're watching your real value go down as things like that happen. And there's also been a changing landscape, as Reuben says, with the legislation of what you can and you can't do, and the tax involved with it as well. So it's a constantly evolving landscape, and that's why I guess we're a business sort of keeping a finger on the pulse, finding out what's happening and keeping clients abreast of that.
It's true, to keep the clients engaged. If I can go a little further into this part of the conversation, there is something always people talk, whether it's sovereign funds or private family office funds, there is a word they call mandate. And can you tell us what is an actual mandate from this financial perspective?
Yes, definitely. One thing though, just to go back to your earlier question, you were talking about the question of the third generation. And I suppose that overlaps with a mandate. A very common mandate in creating a family office is, how do I make sure that this can continue for 2 generations, 3 generations, 4 generations, 5 generations, and so on. And it's really just about how the assets are structured. A lot of people look towards creating liquidity, but it's really a very personal decision. It depends on the family. So some families will come together and they wish to keep maybe operating their business together, whereas other families, they may have made the most of their wealth from a legacy industry, and that might be going away now, so they want to close that down and divest and separate and fragment the assets. There's really a lot of different approaches, but what we find is the most important part in that succession journey is a really open communication. Everyone needs to understand what they want as a family, need to understand what the previous generation wants, and also what the next generation realistically wants. It's very challenging if they inherit, factories and so on that have no idea what to do. So your mandate is very interesting. We often find it's most productive to form a meeting with the entire family, everyone who's a stakeholder or party to it, and really get down to what works for everyone at the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when we see the inner discussions among the families. It's like, what else can be done or how we can actually achieve compromises, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Talking about compromises, I want to discuss from your 2 point of views, which was the most difficult compromise or the most challenging decision you took across your journey so far, and why was that?
I think for me, I guess, it's giving up a lot of the creature comforts that you do have at home, and you lose less in Kuala Lumpur than you do in other parts of Asia. But yeah, it takes a lot of getting used to. Obviously coming to a country which has a different religion, different culture altogether. So yeah, I think that's something that takes some adapting to. And again, compromise. Lots of benefits for coming here. When you're living 16, 17-hour flight away from home though, you're spending time with your family, you say goodbye to a lot of friends behind, and yeah, you make new ones when you get here.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the great compromise is always what you choose to do, as Tom was saying, where do you choose to live? Do you choose to live away from home? Do you choose to take on more opportunity? And then what do you sacrifice on the other side? And you have to sort of make peace with that. Maybe you'll have some regrets, but maybe if you never took those steps to live internationally, I think all 3 of us do. Many of your viewers, I understand, live internationally as well. If you never take those steps to live, work, or study abroad, perhaps there's a different kind of regret you would feel later. So I think what's really most important is not to compromise on your call it sense of adventure, let's say. You have to go and really try things. Yeah. You'll never regret trying things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's true. It's very resounding, those words. Like if you are sitting with a green beret in the army and it's like, you should endeavor. It doesn't matter how hard it is. You will see the fruits sooner than later. And it's like, yeah, despite the discomfort, despite the exhaustion, just keep going. Now, there's one thing, life at work. But there's also life beyond work. So I would like to ask both of you, what do you usually do during the weekends, or what is going on?
Want to go first? Or?
Yeah, sure. So I love traveling regionally. It's just a great thing about being in KL, of course. It's like a 4-hour flight to most of the world. Just this last weekend I was up in Penang, and it's just about, good conversation, good friends, good food. I guess really again, adventure, exploring, trying new things. Novelty is the spice of life, right? So it's very nice for me to just get out, socialize, meet new people, go to new places, try new foods, new countries, new horizons.
Nice. Yeah, for me, I'm a bit newer here. Reuben's been here donkey's years. I'm fairly new. It's my 2nd month, so for me it's a lot of networking, finding new groups of friends, finding new business contacts as well. And for me, I'm big into the sports side of things as well, so I can combine the two. So I do a lot of martial arts and meet people through that. Things like paddle, other sports. So yeah, really just sort of building foundations.
Yeah, that recalls me episode 50 with Luis Noguero. I hope he's watching the episode. He was here for a particular mission with the US Embassy, and then he was trying to find the best judo dojo. Mm-hmm. And it's like, even the mother, that is right now a senior mother, getting angry at Luis, like, hey, what are you doing so far away doing a dojo? It's like, because you know yourself, you would say, okay, this is the best place to practice. And we believe that you are searching that right place, the right community to practice. It's true. One thing is life at work, and the other thing is life that happens beyond work. That if you compound, it only gets better. All of a sudden, work doesn't feel like work. It feels like something that you can go over the distance. Go ahead.
It's a great point. I mean, what attracts me to this industry is a lot of what we do is talking to people, is understanding people. It's personally why private wealth appeals more to me at times than more commercial things, because a lot of what we do is about really understanding people's emotions, what they feel, and connecting with other people in a genuine sense. It's very fulfilling, and it stops feeling like work, right? I mean, even right now, we're all here having this conversation. It's great.
Something that we can say is common right now in the conversation is that we have been in different places. I would like to ask both of you, which have been the little differences you've seen across the regions, and what got your attention the most?
Regions in the sense of countries? Or?
It can be countries, or it can be sceneries, it can be dishes. It's up to you. Because I remember another quote, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
I think I can jump in while Reuben's thinking on his side. When you asked that question, I was thinking of regions in Asia, and the difference between Japan and here is it feels very big. The base language is one thing. Here in Malaysia, Malay is the official language, but English is just as widely spoken. I would say you converse with 90% of people in English, and if you move over to Japan, it's the opposite. It's probably only 10% of people that you can actually converse with in English. So for myself, as a Brit, we're quite spoiled that our mother tongue is so universal. And even if you just go over the border to Thailand, you'll feel a big drop in how many people can speak the language and how fluently they do it as well. And that can have a big effect on how effective you're able to be in your work and your personal life in those regions.
Yeah.
That's about the same for me. I mean, when I first started living in Asia, there was no Grab, there was no Uber, and there was very little Google Translate. You move to a new country, travel, you can get your phone working and so on. So it was a lot more hard work. Just arriving in a foreign airport and trying to buy a coffee and then get a taxi to the hotel was like, it was seriously hard work. But now we're starting to see a lot of these things streamlined. So you can land in Thailand, you open up your phone, you have Grab, you get a Grab to the hotel, you forgot your phone charger, buy one on Grab, it shows up in 10 minutes. It's all universalized, but So I think we're starting to see a lot of some of these differences sort of converge, I guess, and streamline, which is good in a way. But at the same time, for me, still the biggest difference is the language. And when you go from one country and the whole landscape changes culturally, suddenly everything that you sort of got used to and just completely resets.
Yeah, it's true. I can recall that one of the main things, if we normalize by language, then the second variable to consider will be infrastructure. This is something I realized. It's not even money because you can pay with your card or something. But one thing is like, let's say you're working in Kuala Lumpur and you want a cheese sandwich. You can go to any 7-Eleven or any KK store. In Bali, I remember I had to walk 2 kilometers just to get the same sandwich. And then I have to get worried if I can pay with credit or debit card or if I have the actual cash. So this is something I've begun to appreciate a lot, like access to infrastructure to go around. Because in the end, I can write something, given that right now we have some apps and we have some access to data. I can translate something and I can go around, but that can be for me one of the little big differences I've seen so far. And of course, the dialects, the languages, even the normal way of people thinking day by day, it's like something that you capture at the moment. Then all of a sudden the season changes, the month changes, or the festivity changes, and it's like, okay, until the next year. Talking about things that are seasonal, for both of you that has been in different regions, which is the season that you remember the most?
Well, I mean, there's a point of contrast. For me, it's winter, because there's no winter here as such.
Same year round, yeah. And I've just come over from the UK, which is in the middle of winter, to here where it's 30 degrees plus every day. So yeah, I guess that's the one that's the contrast.
Yeah, the contrast. It's like also a factor to consider when you're buying assets. And let me share you something that I experienced in Singapore. All of a sudden, I was walking in Vivo City, one of those very nice malls, and I didn't have to worry about the winter. Okay, whatever. I didn't have to worry about the actual snow, because when you are driving, then all of a sudden you need to get worried that the snow is going to eat the actual steel of the car and everything. And why I'm mentioning this? Because when I saw those people trying to sell me a BMW, and I was like, okay, you're giving me 10 years for the engine and 3 years for the parts and everything, and it's like, but the price is too much for an asset that I can actually get easily somewhere else on a very lower value. And even they were not considered factors like winter. And then I realized that, wait a second, the season itself creates so many variables to consider. Like, right now I don't have to do a mopping with the snow and everything.
I mean, we don't have snow around Prague, but the saying that I remember the most is, the snow looks very beautiful until you have to pick up a shovel, and it stops being beautiful. That's something that is very arduous.
Oh, yeah. That's true. That's totally true. Man, the snow, the ice itself, and sometimes waiting that the sun will melt it, but there is no sun for days. It can be difficult. Now, there is a common quote here that I found among the Malaysians, that the food is something that they take very pride on this. And because we have tasted foods from many places, how can you rank this similar plates that you have been taking the chance to taste from?
Yeah. Shall I go? Yeah. So one thing here is the local food. It tends to be like quite oily as well. So if you're trying to eat clean, you tend not to eat the local food so much. But the tastes awesome. The roti canai you have for breakfast, delicious. The nasi goreng and then nasi lemak as well. Like, a lot of the local dishes here are really good. But yeah, if you break it down on sort of health level, I'd say you kind of need to cook your own food or be branching into other cuisines.
How about you?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I mean, perhaps sometimes it can be quite heavy, but it's very nice. And there's a total fixation here about just creating delicious food. It's totally focused on how can we make the most delicious food possible, which is an absolutely fantastic experience. But it's definitely been, I've definitely indulged a little bit too much myself. Even on the weekend, I discovered this new dish, which is like a fried noodle filled up with shredded crabs and fried oysters, and then just cooked in duck's eggs, and it's like, it's like 4,000 calories per gram or something. It's delicious.
Yeah, it's true. It's like the amalgamation, so many things into one to see, okay, can we create the best flavor possible? Usually comes with the price of so many calories do I actually need that per day. And something that you mentioned about the oily factor of the food, when I got a chance to be in Indonesia, I realized that the food of Indonesia is very similar to the food of Malaysia. Correct me if I am wrong, but it's not as oily right there for some reason. Maybe it's something that they're using, or maybe it was the places I was going. But I guess I have to endeavor a little more into those places. Talking about places and talking about self-reflections, this particular area, the Bangsar South, how that recalls to you compared to other places you have been?
I think you're better to talk about this one because you've watched it come up from the ground, haven't you?
Yeah, it's an interesting suburb. I mean, it's the perfect suburb on paper. Super connected. It's very easy for anyone in the city to get here. There's nice buildings. It's all very new. Lots of shops, cafes, and so on. Amenities. It's very nice. But I suppose the only major comment is, 7 or 8 years ago, most of the buildings were not here. It's a very new suburb, and seeing it just get built so quickly has been remarkable. You just see skyscrapers get declared and then erected in 2 years, 3 years. Back in Australia, it's unheard of for a building to be completed within 3 years, and here they just put up a skyscraper in 36 months. It's unfathomable to me when I first moved here. But now I'm kind of used to it, and I go back to Australia and I'm like, how is everything so slow in terms of construction?
Yeah, I think for me, I guess I didn't really see how the sausage was made. I just arrived and everything was big, new, shiny. Yeah, it's a beautiful city, and this is a particularly beautiful part of it, especially if you appreciate sort of the corporate architecture and seeing impressive office buildings, impressive apartments. And yeah, I don't know if you're planning on getting onto the subject, but the cost of living here is amazing compared to Australia, the UK. And I was paying more in the UK for something of half the quality, half the size, and here you can live like a king.
Yeah, I realize that as well. It's not on the tangibles, but the intangibles that you feel like I get a lot of value. All of a sudden, I became a value investor just paying rent here. And it's like, yeah, you start to feel that you have more capital to do other things or to dedicate towards what is the future. And this is what we are discussing at the beginning, how to preserve better capital for the future. Let me stop for a moment and discuss a controversial topic that become a little more shared in the last week or so. Bitcoin. What are your thoughts about that particular currency? Other people say it's an asset, other people say it's a property. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd say, I'll jump in on this one, it's a fun thing to hold, and it's a good thing to hold as part of a widely diversified portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
The bit where it becomes dangerous is when people become obsessed with these kind of things and they will put their whole investment strategy into Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, and then it's far too much exposure to the markets, far too much volatility and risk to the overall wealth as well. So I am bullish on it. I think it is going to be a good thing to hold over the long term. We're talking decades. I think it's still going to continue to rise, but definitely wouldn't recommend putting too many eggs in that basket. Maybe have it as part of a widely diversified portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's a speculative territory. My personal investment approach is that if you hold something for a long period of time, more than 10 years, let's say, I would want it to be something I could explain to someone who lived 1,000 years ago, very clearly. Land, metal, textiles, agriculture, food production. You could explain these reasonably clearly to someone who lived 1,000 years ago. And even things which seem obvious to us, like internal combustion engine cars, or white goods, appliances, things which were sort of big in the first half of the 20th century. And now these are starting to fade away. And there are things that have come and gone, like carriages and sort of what are they called? All kinds of horse and cart technology which sort of came and it went, and came and it went, and chariots and so on. But I think, for me, anything which I couldn't explain to someone 1,000 years ago, I have to look at really closely. Is this actually an investment, or is this perhaps a speculation which can have its own place, but it's not something I'll look at long term?
Those are very good words to keep in mind, because right now the better question is the diversification, how we can actually be more diversified while getting returns. And something that you mentioned at the beginning, the people who are putting all in, or the maximalists, let's put a caution on that, how it goes, because as you mentioned, we need to see if something is as simple to explain years from now, does that make sense? Because in the business of private wealth, it's like how we can actually explain that to our generations from now. Were we right now prisoners of the moment, or we were ahead of the curve? Only time we said. Talking about time, I enjoyed this conversation too much, and I would like to go back a little in time to the very early beginnings for both of you. How was the world back then when you were growing up? Of course, we can see it's a different window for each of you, but what do you recall from your childhood back then?
In which sense, for example?
For example, I remember that when I was a little younger, I would still have the memories of some of my seniors talking about how the FIFA World Cup of 1990 was, and how all the things, pictures of the moment. So that's a part of the question. Which were the most relatable pictures of your childhood back then?
I suppose early 2000s Australia, the Olympics was a big event. very sort of iconic event. It shut down the entire country. They had their first Olympic stadiums. That would probably be the first one. And the second one is interesting. Perhaps the introduction of smartphones. You know, I remember the whole thing was you had these like sort of weird gadgets in your pocket, and you could call people, and basically the only thing you could do is ask someone to meet you somewhere. You couldn't really do anything with your phone, and they didn't really work in Australia in a lot of the country outside the cities because the network was. You must remember, of course, Australia is the same size as all of Europe. You know, like a domestic flight within Australia is the same as flying from London to Warsaw. This is just like one state to the next, so there's no infrastructure. And so the phones just didn't really work. They were just kind of this thing that, they worked in the cities, but if you went into rural areas, if you went to national park or small towns even, it just didn't work. And then at some point they introduced iPhones, and it was like an overnight shift, and then suddenly everyone got pulled into the sort of technology world like that. And that was probably the biggest epoch shift for me, paradigm shift.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really know what I was thinking of until Reuben started talking, and it reminded me when I was a kid, my parents had a dial-up internet where you had to fire up the computer, and it took 2 minutes to connect to the internet, and going backwards and forwards on it, and Reuben says now the whole world is kind of built on it, and without it, you don't know where we'd be. So yeah, I guess that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, it's like back in those simpler times, we remember we were happy, but happiness is always something that we can always carry on. Now, some people will be watching this. Among them, there will be young Reubens and Thomas watching this as well. I would like to ask for both of you, what piece of advice will you give to your younger self?
Never compromise on your values, I would say. Just if you take the leap, do interesting things. If you sort of saying, should I travel to Japan like you did, just do it. You will not regret I don't know. You will not regret going to Japan for a year and you're like, oh no, I should have started university a year later or whatever. I don't know how you did it, but a lot of people left high school, went traveling. I don't think they had any regrets. So whatever it is you want to do, just do it. Don't sort of sit there in indecision and then 7 years later, oh, I wish I did that, I wish I did that. Just do things.
Yeah. I guess I would elaborate on that from my own personal experience. It took me a long time to find a career that I was passionate about. And I think like a lot of people, I spent too long wondering what my passion was, but you don't figure out your passion and then do it. You have to do something and then find that passion. So I wish that I'd perhaps just tried this career or some of the things I did just sooner. Do you know what I mean? Try it. If it's not for you, then you've learned, you've got a new base to start your next adventure from, and you're more informed. If it is for you, then that's where you find your passion. But I know it was a big struggle for me to work out what my career was going to be. I know for the younger generation, they feel a lot of pressure on that front as well.
I cannot find a better way to close this interview. So if people want to reach out, how they can find you?
LinkedIn is probably best, actually. I don't have any social media myself, so the only thing I have is a LinkedIn profile, so you can probably find me there.
Yeah, I'm not big on social media myself either, but LinkedIn, find us through the website if you're looking for advice on your personal finances, particularly if you're an expat anywhere in the world. That's what we specialise in. And LinkedIn as well.
Reuben, Tom, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. And for people out there, please stay safe and see you when I see you. Bye.
Cheers.